Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. They say one bad decision leads to another, and most of us have learned the painful reality of that statement. Our mistakes have consequences, and when our mistakes are the result of sin, the consequences can be painful. In Joshua chapter 9, verses 16 through 27, Joshua's decision to make an alliance with the people of Gibeon was going to lead to yet another, even more dangerous decision that would have long-term ramifications for the people of Israel. Joshua had failed to seek the counsel of God, and it seems that he continued to make that same mistake in the days that followed. In an attempt to clean up his mess, he only made matters worse. Since he couldn't destroy the Gibeonites, he chose to make them slaves, but assigned them to the tabernacle. He took a pagan and idolatrous people who had knowingly deceived him and gave them jobs that would place them in close proximity to the house of God. Everything about his decision was wrong, but when you fail to seek the counsel of God, things rarely turn out well. Had there been an Academy Award ceremony on those days, the entire nation of Gibeon would have not only been nominated for a Best Actor award, they would have taken home the Oscar. Their portrayal of a poor, disheveled people who had traveled many miles in order to secure a peace treaty with Israel was so convincing that Joshua and the elders of Israel had been duped into believing them. And not only did they make a treaty of non-aggression with the Gibeonites, they swore an oath before God. "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them." Joshua 9, verse 19. By invoking the name of God, Joshua and the leaders of Israel had bound themselves to him, not the Gibeonites. They were now obligated to God. If they broke their commitment, they would answer to God. And it's important to note that this vow or oath was in direct violation of God's command that they completely destroy and eliminate all the nations living in the land of Canaan. They had made a vow to God, obligating themselves to disobey the command of God. We can attempt to excuse their behavior by pointing out that they had been deceived by the Gibeonites, but their real sin was that they had failed to seek the counsel of God. One of the things that stands out in this chapter is the seeming incongruity of the opening verses. It opens with a rather ominous announcement that when the nations west of the Jordan heard about Israel's conquests and the building of their altar at Mount Ebal, they formed alliances against Israel. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland all along the coast of the Great Sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. Joshua 9, verses 1 through 2. Perhaps news of these military alliances had reached Joshua and the elders of Israel, and had played a role in their decision to make a treaty with the Gibeonites. The temptation would have been great to form an alliance with another nation, in the hopes of avoiding yet another conflict and of having someone to come to their aid should they need it. But God had clearly forbidden the making of alliances. He wanted the Israelites to depend upon him. And the fact that the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites were joining forces against the Israelites was no concern to God. And it should have been no concern to Joshua. God had promised to give them all of the land and all the nations living in the land. But the oath was made and the treaty sealed. The Israelites were committed to sparing the lives of the Gibeonites. And when they discovered that they had been lied to, and that the Gibeonites were actually inhabitants of the land of Canaan, and not foreigners from a distant nation, all the Israelites could do was get angry. The people of Israel turned their anger against Joshua and the elders, questioning their leadership and the wisdom behind their decision. This passage forms a turning point in the corporate history of Israel. The defeats of the cities of Jericho and Ai should have been an example of how things were going to go from that point forward. Those two victories were to have been the first of many God-ordained battles. But with the swearing of the oath to spare the people of Gibeon, Israel set a new standard of partial obedience and dangerous compromise that would haunt them for years to come. In fact, when Saul became the first king of Israel, he violated the oath made by Joshua and put some of the Gibeonites to death. And as a result, God was forced to bring a famine on the nation of Israel for their breaking of the alliance and their oath to God. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord. And the Lord said, "There is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. 2 Samuel 21, verses 1 through 2. The fateful decision made by Joshua and the elders of Israel had long-term ramifications. And once they had made their choice to spare the people of Gibeon, they were forced to make yet another decision: what to do with them. And once again it appears that Joshua did not seek the counsel of God, but made a unilateral decision to turn the Gibeonites into servants, humiliating them for their deception by forcing them into a lifelong role of subjugation and servitude. He made them cutters of wood and drawers of water. But look closely at what Joshua decided to do, and the exact nature of the role he assigned to these pagan idol worshippers. Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day, in the place that he should choose. Joshua 9, verse 27. While these people had feigned a fear of God, they had no love for God. They had only hoped to escape annihilation at the hands of the Israelites. When Joshua had questioned them about the motive behind their deception, they had responded, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing." Joshua 9, verse 24. They had feared for their lives, but they had no fear of or love for God. And yet Joshua was giving them access to the altar of God. He was making a decision to allow these pagan foreigners to play a part in the worship of God, even though, as idol worshippers, they were unholy and unacceptable to God. On top of that, Joshua was contaminating the people of God by allowing the inhabitants of Gibeon and the surrounding cities to remain alive, risking the influence of their idolatrous habits and setting up the potential for intermarriage. Joshua had compromised the integrity of his own people by refusing to seek the counsel of God. He and the elders of Israel had made a decision without God that could only lead to future decisions that violated the will of God. The people of God have always faced the temptation to compromise with the world. Even today, we find ourselves living in a land that is hostile to our faith and our God. And while some oppose us, others seek to make alliances with us. They call on us to compromise our convictions in order that we might all just get along. They challenge our beliefs and tempt us to question the validity of God's commands regarding everything from the sanctity of life to his ban on same-sex marriage. They ask us to join them in their effort to create a more loving and tolerant society. But we must seek God's will. We must ask what he would have us do. Our decisions will have long-lasting and far-reaching ramifications. The little compromises we make today will cost us dearly tomorrow.